have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all.
So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this wonderful land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we face and that affects so many areas of our daily lives. It affects everything. It affects our homes, our relationships, our families, our communities, our social order, our economics, our politics. It affects every aspect of our lives. And I've been studying the phenomenon and writing about it, blogging about it for many years now, researching it for the better part of 40 years in my professional career, dealing pretty much exclusively with character-impaired personalities and their aggrieved relationship partners, and writing about it in my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, Character Disturbance, the Phenomenon of Our Age, The Judas Syndrome, and How Did We End Up Here, my book with co-author Kathy Armistead. And I want to say that this matter is pretty serious. We as a species have got to come to terms with how we become the people we are, what really makes us tick, so to speak, and what we can do to forge the kind of character that we can one day live in some peace and some harmony with one another and do great things, build great things, achieve great things. Unfortunately, there's just too much dysfunction, especially in America right now, where we have a higher percentage of our population in some kind of confinement than any other free society on the planet, where all too many folks can barely even function, where marriages and families don't stay together. Just too much hurt all over the place. You know, we went through a period of some pretty incredible prosperity economically after the close of World War II, after the so-called greatest generation, who sacrificed much to save the world from itself. Human history is so littered with conflict. Just seems to be our thing. And it all starts with the individual human heart. Toward that end, many different philosophies, religions, ways of life have sprung up over the years. Guiding philosophies trying to make sense out of this crazy world that we live in, and trying to make sense of our purpose and how to live in peace and harmony. And even with all these things, our history is such, any reasonable glance at it will tell you, our history is such that we always just seem to be at each other's throats. And there always seems to be one group or another jockeying for dominance, jockeying for position over another. This goes on in relationships too. You know, I mentioned the last time, I don't know how many of you were listening last week, but I mentioned last week that the program is going to be taking a slightly different direction over the next several weeks. We want to take a much broader view on really what's happening to not just our country, but to the world at large, and the role character plays in it. And I'm going to bring some personal philosophies, even some of my own faith-based bias, into the equation, because it is essential that we have some grounding. It's essential that we have some base from which to make sense out of all the difficulties that seem to be plaguing us right now. And one of the things that I've been talking about, and that I plan to do a lot more talking about, is this culture of narcissism that has been with us for far too long. I do see the pendulum just beginning to swing back. But this culture of narcissism has just about killed us. This everybody for themselves kind of me-centeredness. Everything's about personal adulation and personal glorification. It's just not right. It's just sad. And there's a situation going on in my state right now, the state of Arkansas. It's got me concerned very greatly. And it really speaks to matters of character and matters of the heart. So I want to talk about it a little bit today. Uh, Along with several other folks, I was among a group that was letting our voices be heard in protest, peaceful protest, of the planned executions here in the state of Arkansas, the planned executions of 8 individuals within the span of 10 days. 8 individuals within the span of 10 days will be put to death by the state of Arkansas, unless there is some last-minute intervention. And the reason for it, the reason why so many will be executed within such a time frame, is that one of the medicines used in the process of terminating the lives of these individuals is about to lose its potency. It's about to expire as far as its maximum potency. And therefore, the state doesn't want to be in a position to have to try and purchase a difficult-to-come-by drug for this purpose. So basically, the state is looking to speed up and therefore execute this many people in such a short period of time to, 1, save money, and 2, not waste a perfectly good drug of human destruction. Now, there's a statement in there somewhere. There's a definite statement in there. I was hoping to have some other folks talk about that today. I was not able to arrange it, but I did some research on my own. And one of the things I was struck by, I hear a lot of folks who are on the more conservative side of the argument with respect to capital punishment, who say that, basically the punishment fits certain crimes, and that it's the state's right, and it is the way to met out proper justice in the case of certain heinous crimes. And I have to say that, to me, just from a practical standpoint, it seems an ultimate admission of defeat. Seems to be a statement that we have no other hope of salvaging a deeply damaged human soul, and therefore the only, quote, solution, end quote, to helping ensure the public's protection is to end the person's life. But when I started doing some research, came across a number of things that just really illuminated me on this topic. And one of the things that I treasure are several of the things that I treasure, actually, and have always taken very, very seriously, are some of the timeless principles of governance and of human affairs and human dignity, some of the timeless principles that our founding fathers saw fit to immortalized in some of our founding documents. And in our Declaration of Independence, Jefferson wrote that certain truths, certain fundamental truths, are self-evident. In other words, they need no validation from any other source. They're that fundamental. And among the self-evident truths are some rights, the first of which listed is the right to life. And it's listed as an inalienable right, which means that it cannot be repudiated by anyone for any reason. It can't even be transferred. It's a right that belongs to the individual because it's an endowment to the individual from the individual's creator. Now, even if you're not a deist, what this means is that just because you've been granted life by nature, God, however you want to see it, that life that you've been bequeathed is an inalienable right that cannot be repudiated. It can't even be transferred. So we can abridge fundamental rights through due process of law. In other words, we can curtail fundamental rights when a person so abuses the responsibility or is so deficient in the responsibility that comes along with those rights that they pose great dangers to the rest of us. We can abridge those rights, but we can never revoke them because they are inalienable. That's what we say. So foundationally, principle-wise, there is no room for punishment that takes a human life. There's just no room for it. And as I mentioned, I think, on the program last week, and I'll mention it again, when we're talking about punishment as a deterrent, or even punishment as justice, we know from mounds and mounds and mounds of research evidence and many, many, many hundreds of thousands of years of experience, we know that punishment is a relatively poor motivator of human behavior. But for it to be even potentially a reasonable deterrent, it has to meet certain conditions. And the way we punish in America, the way we punish is in itself a crime, because we don't punish within our legal system in any manner that would serve as any kind of humane, tough love, basically, or a deterrent. It doesn't teach, it doesn't correct, it doesn't motivate. You know, when you're raising a child, this is a character matter. When you're raising a child, punishment can be a motivator for helping a child learn to become responsible. It can be. The person meting it out can also be abusive. Punishment has to meet certain criteria. We know that for it to be effective. and when used wisely, and with legitimate care and concern, tough love, in other words, it can be a powerful motivator. But it has to meet these conditions. It has to be, one, immediate. And by immediate, we're talking about split second immediate. We're talking about a response occurs and then a negative response follows immediately. Anybody who's ever trained an animal, anybody who's ever had a house pet and has tried to housebreak that pet, especially a dog, anybody who has had an animal knows this to be the case. Knows this to be the case. You know, in addition to needing to be immediate, in order for any organism on this planet to even pay attention to punishment, let alone let it affect them in their behavior, it has to be certain. In other words, there has to be an expectation in the person's mind that if ever they do a certain thing, a certain negative consequence is going to follow across any situation, any place, any time. There's going to be a price to pay, a negative price to pay for exhibiting the undesirable behavior. So it has to be swift and certain, and of course, it has to be of sufficient intensity, negative intensity to deter, but it can't be overwhelming either. And the pathway to gain reinforcement has to be clear. In other words, it has to be clear to the person, what do I have to do behavior correction-wise to get some positive goodies into my life? So this kind of behavior brings me punishment, brings it to me immediately, brings that negative consequence to me immediately across all situations, every single time, and it really is undesirable, this negative consequence. But it's also clear to me what positive thing would be available to me and how I need to correct my behavior in order to get that positive thing. It's like when you're instructing a child. When you're instructing a child not to interrupt, for example. Let's say it's a simple thing like that. The punishment can be as simple as a word of admonishment. And the child is not particularly keen on being admonished. You know, it's a negative kind of thing. Everybody wants words of approval. So let's say you're trying to teach a child. That's how you're trying to teach a child, how to not interrupt. It has to be clear that there's going to be a chastisement almost immediately each time they do interrupt. You know, unfortunately, many parents will wait. You know, they'll put up with one interruption, 2, 3, 4, until they get exasperated, and then they'll tell the child, you know, I've told you not to interrupt. You keep interrupting. Well, in order for it to take in the brain, the response has to be immediate. Has to be immediate. So as soon as that child begins to interrupt, the admonishment has to come. And reliably, each time, and from everybody, in every situation, that the child might do it. And then it has to be clear to the child what the benefit is of doing otherwise. To come to see that if they're courteous, they're more likely to be listened to by others when they have something to say and not be subjected to interruption. It just works like that. We're just not dealing with one another very well, especially in our relationships. That's why on my blog at manipulative-people.com, I've been focusing in the latest series of articles on the relational aspect of character disturbance. For many, many years, if you go to drgeorgesimon.com, that's drgeorgesimon.com, or if you tune into, or if you go to manipulative-people.com, both URLs will get you to the same place. You'll find all these timely articles. And they pretty much will tell you about all the relational aspects of character disturbance. And the reason I'm focusing on that so much lately is because for years and years, we have, as a profession in psychology and psychiatry, we have chosen to define personality and character disturbances, especially personality and character disorders, in a particular way that's kind of outlived its usefulness. And we're coming to realize very much so, that we need to take a look at how certain character traits, how certain behavioral predispositions affect relationships and impair a person's inability to form the kind of bond with another human being that leads to true intimacy, true mutual positive regard, leads to depth and stability, maybe even permanence in the relationship. That's always helpful for marriage, so that kids can grow up in a stable, loving home, have all the guidance that they need, witness firsthand certain principles being modeled. You know, it pains me so much. It has pained me so much over the years to have witnessed so many families fall apart right before my eyes. I know a family right now. And of course, I'm not giving anything away here, because what I'm telling you would apply to 1,000 different situations. I've seen the same scenario, but I have in mind one right now. Family's been together for years, 20 plus years. Children ranging the spectrum from those still in the early stages of their raising to those just about ready to go to college. And it's falling apart. Why is it falling apart? Well, it's falling apart because both adults have not been serious about examining those aspects of their character that have made them behave so unlovingly toward one another. In one case, it's the need or the desire. I'll change that. You know, the words mean things, and the way we think about things, it really affects everything. So I'll change that word need. In one case, it's the desire to dominate and control. And in the other case, it's the desire to be heard. And I cannot tell you how many times I have seen people willing to cross certain lines because they don't have it within their character to put on the brakes, basically, to just say to themselves, you know, I'm really, really tempted to do this, but I'm not going to let myself. I'm not going to step over the line. And so they say things, hurtful things, and they do things, really hurtful things, with the expectation that there'll be no consequence, or maybe if there is a consequence, and they fully realize that there is a consequence and likely to be one the next time, without enough care to make the effort not to make the same mistake again, not to do the same hurtful thing again. You know, it is all, in the end, about how we relate. That's the series I've been writing about. It's all about how we choose to relate to our fellow man, to anyone, even to those with whom we're in a more intense or intimate relationship. And I like to tell my folks at training workshops that what makes treatment for disturbed characters so different from all of the traditional forms of therapy is that basically the therapy is training in relating. It's reparenting, it's retraining. Person has to learn how to interact in an entirely different way. That's what makes it so different. And that's also what makes it work many times, especially when the character disturbance is not so great that even the best of methods are likely to fail. So it's a different kind of work. And I'm here to tell you that it is pretty effective, actually. People can learn to relate in different ways. In order to do that, they have to change the way they think about things. They have to change their attitudes. And they have to change the typical ways that they try to justify themselves. And the tactics that they use to manipulate and control situations. That all has to change. They can do that with appropriate training and reinforcement. They can do that. And that's what the therapy is all about. Now, I just realized how remiss that I have been, even though I've got more to talk about on this issue, but I've been remiss in giving out the phone number because I know that there are some of you out there who might want to join this conversation. And if you are one of those folks and you have something to say, maybe you have a question you want to ask, maybe you have a situation you want to share, maybe you just have a comment that you think would interest the audience, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. And join the conversation. I'd be happy to take your call. That's 718-717-8296. So what is it about this culture of narcissism? What is it about this culture of narcissism that we've been in for so many decades now that has reinforced a way of relating in so many people that has been so toxic to relationships? Well, I go back to the story from which we get the term narcissism. It comes from the Greek myth, a tale about Narcissus the hunter. Narcissus is one of those superheroes, archetypal hero in the myth. And he is doing his thing. He's out hunting as he does, and we all know the basics of the story. Many of us do. But he comes upon his reflection. He sees his reflection in a clear pond, in a clear pool of water, and he's enamored of his own reflection. He literally falls in love with his own image. And in the story also, a central figure in the story is a nymph. That nymph is called Echo. And in Greek mythology, it's a big badge of honor for the hero of the story to be pursued by the nymphs. And in this particular story, the tale of Narcissus the hunter, he is being pursued pretty relentlessly by Echo, the nymph. But he is completely unfazed by Echo's advances because he has already found, or he believes he has found, all that he needs in himself. So he is not impressed, basically, with Echo's advances. We now know from our research that there are two kinds of narcissists. I knew this early on when I was doing my work, my early case study research. I had already gone over many, many cases, reflected on them, taken notes, copious notes. And I knew for a fact that there were two very, very different types of narcissism out there. At the time, scientific research didn't support that notion. There just simply wasn't the research to support it. But I knew what I had seen. Two very, very different types of narcissism. And so when I wrote my books, In Sheep's Clothing, and later on in my book, Character Disturbance, too, I use the terms the more character disturbed narcissist or the more character disordered narcissist versus the more classically neurotic kind of narcissist. And neurosis is that conflict that rages inside of us between our primal selves, our id, our animal nature, our baser instincts, and the dictates of our conscience or our superego. And character disturbance is defined as the relative absence of neurosis. The conflict doesn't rage so much between our baser selves and our superego because the superego is not there. There's just not enough conscience. And so the person does things, says things, thinks things without compunction because there's just not enough conscientiousness in the person to prevent it. That's the very nature of character disturbance. That's what makes a person a disturbed or disordered character. And I mentioned that there are two types of narcissism. The more classically neurotic type that expresses itself in some kind of compensatory facade, braggadocio, promoting an air of superiority and greatness that is really a cover for underlying feelings of insecurity and worthlessness. It's an act, basically, an unconsciously constructed act that hides a whole lot of inner pain and vulnerability. That's the vulnerable narcissist. And then there's the more grandiose type. I called them in my book, before the term grandiose even became commonplace to use, the grandiose type being the type who really does truly hold themselves out to be special and above all the rest, and therefore entitled to act in the manner they so choose, even if that manner is hurtful to others. And in the tale of Narcissus, Narcissus seems to be of the more grandiose type because he just knows he's great. And he's completely impervious. He's completely impervious to the advances of Echo, the nymph. Compensatory narcissists need to be admired, loved. They have this great need to have everybody adore them. And underneath it are feelings of shame, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of poor self-image. These days, unfortunately, because of the culture of narcissism, these days we have many more folks of the grandiose type among us. Folks who simply don't care. A lot of folks are tempted to say, when they witness this kind of narcissism, this egregiously ugly kind of narcissism, some folks see it in our current president and are appalled by it. And they say to themselves, they can't see, perhaps, how this comes across. They just don't appreciate. They must not be aware how other people are perceiving them and how distasteful it is. But as I say in my training workshops, I use several rhyming phrases to illustrate points. It's not so much that they don't, it's not so much that they're not aware. The bigger problem is that they don't care. It's not that they're not aware, it's that they don't care. So for the grandiose narcissist, they're aware of how other people are put off and even offended by what appears to be their claims to greatness. They're very aware of that, but they don't care. They just know in their heart of hearts they're all that. And we used to always think that this kind of ego inflation was compensatory. But it's precisely because such folks chronically overestimate their capabilities, their worth. They're chronically overestimating everything. It's because of that they can't develop a solid, decent sense of self-worth. It's because of the grandiosity. And it's a sad fact. You know, I'll get a little political here. It wasn't that long ago we had someone claiming, and you know, it is true. Both sides on the political spectrum have an awful lot to answer for. Because there were a lot of problems. There were definitely a lot of problems still remaining with the Affordable Care Act before it was railroaded through under reconciliation. There were a lot of problems with it, and everybody knew that. And promises were made. Promises were made that everybody knew couldn't be kept, wouldn't be kept. Matter of fact, we have plenty of recorded evidence that people knew. But the intention was to get a foot in the door, to begin the march toward universal health care. And if that had been straightforward, if it were just on the table honestly, we had an honest debate, win or lose, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in right now. So even though there was some degree of good intention, having to do with making sure that many more folks who didn't have coverage would have coverage. That was the somewhat good intention. But in the lying and in the manipulation, in all those character deficient aspects of things, a disaster resulted anyway. Right now, most plans, the premiums and the deductibles are just so laugh out loud ridiculous, it's not funny. So everybody's paying tons more, and they don't really get much. And I don't say everybody, the vast majority are. The ones who don't hurt under so many of these solutions are those at the very, very top of the economic ladder and those at the very bottom. All the other working stiffs pretty much get taken. I'll be polite about it. And that's the way it often goes. with with an ego the size of Mount Everest says that everybody else is stupid, everybody else lies and cheats, nobody else knows how to make a deal, claims to know how to do it, claims that he and he alone knows how to fix it, can fix it quickly, that it's really simple, that you don't have to be a rocket scientist. All you have to do is have the skills to negotiate and get the job done. And he's the great negotiator. So right off the bat, the first thing he's going to do is to fix what's broken in this thing and replace it with something much, much better, something everybody will love and will give him the credit for as a wonderful engineer of social justice. A brilliant mind with a negotiating skill, getting the job done in service of the people. And then, of course, it falls flat on its face. And when it does, this person who said, first of all, it was simple for the right person, it was a simple task. He then says, who knew that it was difficult? And then he says that he never said that he was going to do this and that it was going to be easy and that only he could do it and that he'd do it quickly. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. And anybody that looks at this would have to say that there's nothing more important than character. Because this is the reason things stay so broken. Folks aren't true to their word. They don't keep their promises. Character matters. It matters a lot. It affects everything. It especially affects our relationships. But more than that, it affects everything else in the field of human relations. From our families, to our communities, to our economics, to our politics. Every single aspect of our social well-being is affected by the character issue. So how do we build it? How do we help human beings develop into decent, responsible people, caring people who make a difference? How do we do that? How do we forge the kind of character in our individuals that will allow them, inspire them to make a positive difference? That's the question. And toward that end, as you know, I've been working on a book, my final opus. I call it The 10 Commandments of Character. It's been undergoing substantial revision. And I hope to be talking about all of the various aspects of it in the next several weeks on this program. And I really seriously want to hear from you, the listeners, as we discuss the principles on these 10 commandments of character. Important life lessons, learning imperatives that I think are essential to building the kind of character we need in order to make this world a better place. Those things that an individual must learn and must incorporate into themselves in order to be the kind of person who will help build a better world by having wholesome, healthy, intimate relations, by keeping marriages and families together, by promoting social justice, by being faithful at work, putting forth an honest day's effort, not lying, thieving, or cheating. All of those lessons that promote that kind of good pro-social behavior that will help make it all work. So I'll be talking about those essential commandments and actually wanting some input, because as it stands right now, the book, even though it's about 75%, I think, ready for press, has a lot of tweaking to do before it's ready. And I really want this to be right, because it is, like I said, my final opus, I think. So I'm anxious to hear from you in the coming weeks as I talk about these 10 commandments of character. I'm going to spend several weeks actually on each one of them. And so I'm going to want your input on each one. And I once again ask you to invite you to avail yourself of my work, my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People. This is the international bestseller that many regard as the definitive handbook on dealing with the manipulators / controllers, emotional string pullers, shall we say, in your lives. And then Character Disturbance, my more comprehensive look at all the disturbed and disordered characters that you're likely to encounter in your life, how to recognize them, how to deal with them, and most especially what to look for in the way of help if you go about seeking help for dealing with any of these folks. And then my book, The Judas Syndrome, the only book of mine that is from a faith-based perspective that takes a look at how genuine faith can really save. And then my book with Dr. Armistead, How Did We End Up Here? The Toxic Relationships Survivor Guide, a key to the guide to surviving and thriving in this character-disordered world of ours. So I invite you to make yourself available to those books and my blog at manipulative-people.com, and join me again next week for another edition of Character Man. See you next week.
The Anti-Media